So this month of September started off by picking our very first apples off of our apple tree. And it took a total of 4 seasons to get apples. I wanted to make sure that all of my kids were home so we could harvest as a family, and they were all so excited to pick them. Ever since the apples were growing all summer, they were so tempted to pick them all summer long. I didn't expect very many apples this year, but to my surprise, we harvested quite a few. And we made sure every kid was involved in filling the basket. And one reason why I love to garden is it's not only for myself, but to see my kids excited over the food that we grow. And you can see here just how excited they really are. These apples actually have a hint of sweetness, but they're more on the tart side, which is perfect preserving and baking with them. So these apple trees need a pollinator to produce apples, so we have actually 2 apple trees right next to each other to pollinate each other. Now the other apple tree is a year behind this one because the deer ate it and I had to replace that one, but we still got 1 apple off the other tree this year, and it was actually huge and it tasted really sweet. So I know now that every year we'll just get better with harvesting apples as long as the trees get the care that they need, and I'm looking forward to doing all the canning next year with apple pie filling, applesauce, apple crisp, and just fresh eating. So this year was very special because I ended up making an apple crisp for my husband's birthday. It was special because these were our very first apples to bake with, and my husband absolutely loves my apple crisp recipe, and it's just his favorite. We have to make it every single year. And my daughter put on the candles on the apple crisp, and of course the kids were so excited to eat something sugary right before their bedtime. We also celebrated on Sunday with my husband's family, and I finished up using some of the apples, and I made an apple pie, and of course I made a cheesecake to share with family so they all could try the apples in the apple pie, and they really enjoyed it. So the next project in September was starting to clean my garden. This sweet potato vines were taking over my leek row. My uncle actually told me that it was okay to cut and trim the vines. So after learning that, I started cutting out the vines to clean up my leek row and to be able to use the walk path again. This row was in a need of a really good weeding. It had a lot of grass growing and the leeks were getting smothered by the sweet potato vine. So next on my list was to start lettuce for my fall crop. I grew lettuce all summer. I used a summer variety all season, and I was able to harvest lettuce all summer long, which was really great. I didn't have to buy very many at the grocery store this year, which was a goal of mine. So I'm a little behind on starting more for my fall harvest, which I've been pretty busy with just cleaning and planting fall cover crops, but I'm going to experiment growing lettuce through the winter. And I hope not have to buy any from the store, which will really also be nice. So here I like to try to plant at least 3 seeds in every cell just because it has a really good germination rate. So I start off by damping the soil, then after seeding I will damp the soil again so the seeds have something to stick to. And then I'll lightly dust some of the soil on top, and again I'll water it really well, and then I'll place it under my grow lights until it's time to transplant outside. Then I'll harden them off, and then I will plant them underneath the row covers for protection, because we're getting kind of close to our first frost, and I want to make sure that the lettuce gets a good start so the night temperatures won't be too cold. So the next morning, I fermented some sourdough to make donuts, and that's what I made for the kids. This was Saturday morning, so all the kids were home, and I like to sometimes make something fun and something that the kids that will enjoy. And of course, donuts are always a hit, and they like them. Now, I have to be careful about the sourness of sourdough sometimes, because my husband and kids don't usually like the taste of sourness, but these were really good and the kids actually enjoyed them. I just double glazed them, and we enjoyed them fresh out of the oil, so they were warm and really delicious. So continuing on from cleaning our garden, we let some of our bean seeds go to seed and dry out so we can plant them next year. So I can save just a little bit of money not having to buy bean seeds for next year. And then I harvested most of what lettuce we have in the garden to eat on during the week. I just washed, dried, and I stored them into bags, and I filled them with air, and then I closed them up. And I just end up putting them in my crisper in the fridge so they are ready to eat all week long for lunches and dinner. And I really enjoyed the varieties of lettuce that I picked this year, and I will probably continue to grow them every year. If you watched my previous cover crop video, we've been working really hard on planting our cover crops before our first frost hits soon. So today we are working on tomato buckets. I usually cover these buckets with shredded leaves, but this year I decided to grow cover crops in them. I planted oats and peas, which the oats is something that the peas can trellis up and climb and grow on, and then the peas will release some nitrogen back into the soil, which will be good for the tomatoes for next year because tomatoes are really heavy feeders. So these cover crops will give the nutrients what the tomatoes need for next year, and then the oats will provide an organic cover when the first frost kills it, so the winter dry air won't affect the soil and dry it out. So I'm excited to actually see how this next year will go by using these cover crops. And again, our younger kids are always helping on whatever we are doing in the garden. The older kids are in school right now, or they would be here too, helping in the garden. So we started off by ripping out the tomato plants, and the cows were enjoying the last of the tomatoes that was left on the plants. They really enjoy eating whatever we have throwing over the fence from the garden. After removing the plants, we would work up the soil so it could get some airflow down into the container, into the soil. And then we mixed in the seeds. And I try only to do a handful, and that seemed to be the perfect amount to plant. I will probably throw on some chicken manure through the winter time, and that's just something I did last year, and it just seemed to help the soil. So it's calling for rain tomorrow, so this is actually the perfect opportunity to plant all these seeds. We usually use tomato cages, but that always ends up falling over when the tomatoes get big, so I don't really like to use them. But since we have them, we will probably continue to use them just because we have them. And we end up putting like a T-post into the bucket with some string, and we string up the tomato to it, and it seems to help support the tomatoes every year. But so we just ended up taking all the tomato cages out, stacking them together on the ground, and then I keep them close by the tomato buckets for next year. I finished seeding my 2 last rows of squash. I still have pumpkins growing on the 2 opposite ends. I don't know if you can see in this video. So there's still kind of plastic holding those in. So I didn't want to rip the pumpkin vines out just yet because we have pumpkins growing. And so I just went ahead and seeded the rest of these rows so they can get a good start before our first frost hits. So the more cover crop that I plant is the less time and labor of raking leaves, shredding the leaves, and then hauling the leaves all to the garden to cover on all of my rows. So I might as well plant the cover crops and get it done before it gets too cold, because I don't like to be cold whenever it starts dropping temperature outside. So then I started to harvest some of my rosemary, and I am going to take quite a bit off this because usually rosemary does not overwinter for me. Well, it didn't at the previous house, but I'm going to try again this winter to see if I can get it to overwinter just with a bunch of shredded leaves. And then I noticed this week it's just been so hot that this cabbage right here started to split. So we're going to go ahead and harvest this so we can eat this sometime this week. I will probably make deer egg rolls out of this. And it's totally fine when it splits. You can still eat it. And I'm just glad that I noticed this when I took all the netting off the row cover, so we can go ahead and harvest it before it splits too bad. And then there's 3 left on this row, and then I have another row full of cabbage, so they'll be ready soon. So I brought the rosemary inside, and I'm going to air dry this time. Usually on my herbs, I like to, as soon as I harvest them, I like to dehydrate them. So this time I'm just going to make it easy, and I'm just going to string them up in my laundry room to air dry for a couple weeks, and then I'll store them away to use this winter. So now I'll have to remember to at least grow 3 plants for my family to have through the winter. So I think the 3 plants are just perfect because I don't use rosemary a lot, but I do some. And I think this is honestly the perfect amount to use for my family.